Hello and welcome to The Nation. I'm Jessy Chahal. Malaysia and the United Kingdom have shared a profound and intricate relationship, deeply intertwined by a rich tapestry of cultural, historical and diplomatic connections. Joining us today is the High Commissioner of the United Kingdom to Malaysia, His Excellency Charles Hay. With his tenure coming to an end, we reflect on his time here in Malaysia. Welcome, Your Excellency. Apa khabar?
Baik, terima kasih.
Terima kasih, and thank you for being with us here today. Thank you for making time. Let's get right into it. Of course, you've been here 4.5 years, and in that turbulent times as well, unprecedented times with the pandemic. As the High Commissioner, of course, bilateral relationships between both countries, UK and Malaysia, remain of utmost importance. What were some of the crucial aspects of your time here, and what would you say are among some of your accomplishments?
Well, thanks very much, Jessy. I mean, I've been in the kind of dream position of any ambassador or high commissioner, coming to a country with a fantastically strong relationship. But then the problem is, how do you make that even stronger? How do you build on something and strengthen it?
Right.
But as we look back over the 4 years, I think one thing that has definitely become more and more entrenched is the UK government's tilt towards the Indo-Pacific, we're calling it. And this is a kind of key part of our post-Brexit relationship with the world. So the British government did a comprehensive survey of all of our overseas policies and then concluded that this region is one of the most important regions for the UK to strengthen relations in. And Malaysia, of course, lies absolutely at the heart of the region. So during my time, the UK has become a dialogue partner with ASEAN. We're the first new dialogue partner in 25 years. This week, we conclude with the signature of the CPTPP, when the UK and Malaysia will both be members of this really exciting new trade partnership. But bilaterally, we've transitioned to becoming a strategic dialogue partner with Malaysia. We signed a number of MOU, and our trade continues to prosper and expand. Trade and investment, always a key part of any bilateral relationship.
Right, of course, that being part of your mandate here as well. In terms of efforts, it requires a striking balance, in fact, between national interests and then to also highlight or promote shared values between both countries. How did you navigate this, and how did you sort of, balance this during your term?
You're right. This is a key task for any ambassador. And while the UK and Malaysia agree on many things, we're both, Westminster-style democracies, modern democracies, there are certain areas where we don't agree, or where we may have a slightly different perception of things. So let me give you just a couple of examples where it's been tricky over the years. One is palm oil. Of course, I think all your viewers will know there have been conflicts over palm oil between Malaysia and the UK and the EU. I think for me it's been a very interesting learning experience to understand more and better about palm oil, and to understand, for example, the reasons why palm oil is such an important industry in Malaysia, and understanding the steps and the efforts that Malaysia has made to make the palm oil industry more sustainable, but also how productive palm oil is compared to some other oil crops. It's 6 times more productive, for example, than other oil crops. So I think the first thing is that you have to be humble and listen and try to understand the other's point of view. There are some things on which we probably will find it harder to agree. So LGBT rights is one such case, and I've had some fascinating conversations with people. I remember a very interesting conversation with the Mufti in Terengganu, for example, on this whole issue. And of course, we're never going to see eye to eye. But it's been interesting for me to explain to people that in the UK, gay marriage was introduced by a conservative government. That's something that comes as a surprise to a lot of people who would assume that it would be something a progressive government would introduce. But in fact, the government at the time concluded that marriage was the important institution, and actually the homosexuality bit was kind of secondary. So that's the sort of thing that you can learn from being open and just discussing things with people.
That's a really interesting topic. Then have to keep that for another day, another time. But you're leaving Malaysian shores very soon. Let's look at some of the sort of more important areas of concerns or focus. Climate change, human rights, and as you've just mentioned about palm oil, the environment, and they are all global crises. What initiatives would you say or highlight specifically that helped you to champion or encourage Malaysia to move towards or tilt or adopt a more sustainable practice? We know the UK has been an advocate for human rights, not just here in Asia, but globally as well.
Well, on the climate change side, this has been a very important topic which has very much dominated my time here. And I think over the last 4.5 years, if you look at every country in the world, we've all moved from different levels of understanding towards understanding this is a genuine global emergency that we have to tackle together. And we're all now very conscious of extreme weather events. During my time, we've had some terrible flooding here in Malaysia. We have now extreme weather events globally that have not really been experienced before. And all the science suggests that these are linked to global warming. And we've agreed globally that we need to keep the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees or below. A very important moment on that journey was the COP26 in Glasgow, which the UK chaired back at the end of 2021. And when we started the process of chairing COP26, about 30% of the global economy was covered by a net zero ambition. Now it's over 90%. And it's been very good for me to see Malaysia engaging in that dialogue, becoming one of those countries that signed up to a net zero commitment. Malaysia is now part of that 90%. We as a High Commission have been able to work on some very interesting projects in different parts of Malaysia, helping communities and cities work their way towards emissions reduction and so on. So it's a journey that we're all on together, and we all have to complete together.
Right. We move on to an unprecedented time, of course, the pandemic, and that was just around the time 2020 when Brexit happened as well. How did you address the concerns of British businesses operating here in Malaysia during these times?
Well, the biggest concern for many British businesses was whether they would be able to continue to operate, because, of course, as you and your viewers will remember very well, there was a clampdown on, if you like, non-essential businesses. But this was very much a journey we were all making together. So some very quick initial decisions were taken on what businesses were essential. But it soon became clear that actually there were a lot of ancillary businesses that were also essential parts of the supply chain. So, for example, obviously, a company making latex gloves for the medical industry, that clearly is an essential business. But then there might be others involved in the supply chain that were not deemed to be essential businesses. That was an interesting case for us, because one of those companies is called Synthoma, the British company, and they make one of the basic essentials for rubber gloves. And at first they weren't designated an essential business,
right,
but we worked closely together with MITI to make sure that they were. So that's just an example of where we work with British business to try to ensure that they could contribute in the best possible way to Malaysia and to the global effort to deal with COVID.
That's right, and also the vaccines during that time.
Absolutely. So it was a very fulfilling moment to me personally, as I was able to stand on the tarmac with the then Health Minister, Kari Jamaluddin, and we welcomed a shipment of vaccines from the UK for Malaysia. That was a very special moment.
Yeah, definitely. Historical time indeed. As we move on, we take a quick commercial break. In just a couple of moments, we'll be right back here to continue our conversation with His Excellency Chahal here. We'll be right back.
Nyamuk Aedes mudah membiak di dalam air yang bertakung. Cegah pembiakan nyamuk Aedes. Pastikan bekas yang boleh menakung air dibuang dengan betul. Tutup rapat semua bekas yang menyimpan air. Periksa saluran air pada bumbung rumah agar tidak tersumbat. Tiada Aedes, tiada denggi.
Muh kita ramai-ramai sertai 6,600 langkah perpaduan pada 16 bulan Julai 2023 jam 6.30 pagi sempena dengan majlis pelancaran Bulan Kebangsaan dan keyboard jalur gemilang di Bulatan Sultan Azlan Shah, Ipoh Perak. Nak tahu lebih lanjut? Layar je www.merdeka360.my.
Welcome back. You're watching The Nation, indeed a special edition. With us is, of course, His Excellency Charles Hay, joining us, the High Commissioner of the United Kingdom to Malaysia. This is his exit interview. And of course, he leaves Malaysian shores in just a couple of days. It has been an interesting, of course, journey for you and also for the UK that has just joined the CPTPP this year. Now, some witnesses are saying that any misalignment of what is currently being practiced, that may jeopardize important strategy, and that could even damage business confidence. How will the UK protect the interests of British investors here in Malaysia? And furthering that, I guess also, how will you ensure, or how did you ensure, that these agreements remain fair and beneficial to both countries?
Well, the first thing to say is how very excited and happy we in the UK are that we are just about, it's actually happening this week in a signing ceremony in New Zealand, that the UK is going to join CPTPP. For us, this is a really important agreement. It's, as you know, a multilateral agreement with many countries involved. It's also a very high quality modern trade agreement. So your point about the protection of investors, of course, the bedrock of that is that the countries concerned have to have a well-functioning legal system with protections in place for investors and any other person. And that is the case in Malaysia already. But the point about CPTPP is that it introduces, if you like, state-of-the-art, modern mechanisms whereby if there are any issues, then they can be dealt with through a transparent way, which is fair and equal between all of the different members of CPTPP. So in fact, it's better for business because they have an understanding of how they can operate in every CPTPP country. It should encourage trade. It should encourage investment. So I don't really see a downside in that. I think it should only be for the good.
Okay. And how has in terms of your role, how have you ensured that this trade between Malaysia and the UK that remains fair and beneficial to both countries?
Well, we have a fantastic trading arrangement already. So we have about £5.5 billion worth of trade bilaterally each year, and that's gone up 8% last year. Of course, part of that was a recovery from COVID, but still the performance has been impressive. So we start from a very, very strong base. But the important thing is that amongst all the CPTPP members, the UK already has a trade arrangement of one kind or another with all of them except for Malaysia.
Right.
So this CPTPP should unlock huge opportunities for both UK and Malaysian business in the future.
That's right. Of course, this agreement is the world's largest trade agreement as well, bringing many countries together. Now, let's move into defence ties. The UK and Malaysia as well have had very strong defence ties, in fact, joining in many of the exercises. It was announced recently that UK and Malaysia will further collaborate for regional peace and security, and as you mentioned as well, the interest in the Indo-Pac. How were you able to strengthen this partnership?
The cornerstone of this between us is the five-power defence arrangement, which dates back 50 years now. In fact, it celebrated its 50th year last year. Mm-hmm. And this brings together the UK, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore and Malaysia. And it's a really important arrangement because it allows our soldiers, sailors and Air Force people to cooperate in annual exercises, which the UK has taken full part in during the whole time that I've been here. So it's a great opportunity to understand each other better, to learn from each other. But then further on from that, I guess we have the historical connections between our armed forces. Yeah. So I'm an ex-serviceman myself. I served in the British Army before I became a diplomat. Right. I served in a Scottish regiment. So I was delighted to discover that one of your regiments, the 5th Royal Malay Regiment, has a twinning partnership with the Scottish regiment. So I went to visit them a couple of years ago, and it was fantastic because they had a pipe band. They wore kilts, they wore tartan flashes, they had, so many things that were very familiar to me, and it was wonderful to see that. And we also have very strong relationships in terms of the numbers of service people that go to study in the UK. So, for example, His Majesty the Argong went to Sandhurst. I was very privileged during my first year here, before COVID, to be able to accompany His Majesty on a guest-to-government visit to the UK to see his first son pass out of Sandhurst in turn. I also studied at Sandhurst. Fantastic. So, again, the relationships here are very personal. They're person to person as well as institutional, and that makes them extremely strong.
That's right. Indeed, a deep history there between both countries. I think, or I believe, you may be one of the very, if it could not be another High Commissioner in your position that has seen the significant change here in Malaysia and the UK simultaneously with the change of government and prime ministers. Walk us through that. How did you adapt to those changes each time around? And I think in the same time, how did you manage to ensure that the diplomatic approach still remained relevant and effective?
So it has been an interesting time. During my time, I've seen 4 prime ministers in both Malaysia and the UK.
Right.
So as you say, that's been an interesting set of transitions. But I think the fundamental point is that the democratic fundamentals and the strength of the institutions is there. So I had, not so much now, but Malaysians come to me and say, oh, isn't British business very worried about the instability in Malaysia? And if Malaysia is unstable, then so is Britain. But the point is that actually neither of us are politically unstable. These are democracies. So, we used to changing governments. We used to changing prime ministers. The most important things are the fundamentals. So you never
felt at any point a little bit unsure of what might happen in the change of government or under a new prime minister's leadership?
No, I didn't, because for me it was clear after GE14 that the fundamentals in Malaysia are strong. The institutions are strong. Parliament is strong. The judiciary is strong and independent. So there's no basic concerns, and that's what business looks at. They look at, they look at the taxation, the fiscal system. They look at the rule of law. Those are the things they look at. They don't really necessarily look at who's in power. That changes, but the economic fundamentals and the if you like, the fundamentals of the relationship don't change.
Right. We look at a time where now blocks are important, and it's also a time where its relevancy is tested. What does Malaysia and the nation have to look forward to being part of the family of nations, the Commonwealth?
It's interesting because, of course, for me, the primary block for Malaysia is ASEAN. And it has been interesting for me, my first time in an ASEAN country, to see the importance of ASEAN centrality and ASEAN cohesiveness in the world. But the Commonwealth is a very, very interesting entity because, there are 55 countries that are members of the Commonwealth.
56 now, I believe.
Sorry, 56. No, you're right,
Gabon
exactly. You're right. Togo and Gabon have just joined, yeah. And that underlines a point I was about to make, which is that a lot of people seem to associate the Commonwealth with, if you like, some sort of British colonial legacy. That may have been true back at the beginning when the Commonwealth was founded, but it's absolutely not the case now. And I think that started to change in the 90s when Mozambique joined, the first country to have no, if you like, historical connection to the UK.
Right.
Since then, as you mentioned, we just, the 2 new countries, Togo and Gabon, which have a French legacy rather than British. But the Commonwealth brings together a massive range of countries, from the biggest, India, to the smallest, some of the small island developing states. And it's a forum where we can discuss together things that are important to all of us, like human rights, like democracy, like the environment, sustainability, and so on. And that makes it a very strong institution. Right.
Was going to jump into the next question. We've just got the cue that we need to take a quick breather. We'll be right back after this, talking a little bit more about, of course, His Excellency's time here in Malaysia, but also perhaps to get his perspective on the English language proficiency in the country. We'll be right back.
Hentikan penyebaran kandungan berbau hasutan. Dekati kedamaian, pupuk persefahaman dan jauhi perbalahan. Bersama-sama kita memupuk semangat perpaduan. Hindari sebarang tindakan yang boleh mencetuskan provokasi kaum. Raikan hari perayaan di Malaysia bersama-sama dengan mengunjungi antara satu sama lain. Selain mengeratkan silaturahim, masyarakat juga dapat memahami dan menghormati perayaan di Malaysia. Sertai aktiviti kemasyarakatan dan sukan bersama-sama. Dan sebaran mesej positif mengenai kepentingan perpaduan oleh media massa. sekiranya terdapat maklumat kandungan sensitif, berbaur agama, bangsa dan institusi diraja atau 3R. Laporkan kepada Suruhanjaya Komunikasi dan Multimedia Malaysia SKMM.
Welcome back. You're watching The Nation with me, Jessy Chahal. Of course, in this special edition, we are joined by His Excellency Charles Hay, of course, who will be leaving Malaysia in just a couple of days, in fact.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Before we went off for the break, I did tell our viewers a little bit about getting your perspective on English proficiency here in the country. It's been a bit of a debate, but I think English also does play a role in attracting FDIs and of course also to foster international business partnerships. Were you able to take any measures perhaps to encourage the development of English language proficiency here in Malaysia among Malaysians?
We do a certain amount of this. So the British Council, for example, is heavily involved in engaging with the Malaysian government. They have a program called English Connects where they're working with about 6,000 Malaysian teachers of English. In the High Commission, we've had a couple of programs to do with literacy and promoting British authors and so on. And what's really impressed me actually is the number of, if you like, non-governmental bodies like the English Speaking Union and others who are doing their bit to promote the use of English language in Malaysia.
That's right. Of course, that's really important. And just a quick one here to put you in a bit of a tough spot. Based on a simple sampling of people around me and some of my friends from media, it does seem to give me the impression that the English language is not perceived as important, especially in broadcasts, in newsrooms, where perhaps English news receives minimal attention because of an excuse of low viewership. What are your thoughts on that?
One of the great strengths of Malaysia is the cultural and linguistic diversity, and it constantly amazes me when I meet Malaysians who are proficient in 2 or 3 languages. It puts us Brits very much to shame because very few of us.
That's the norm, right?
That's the norm,
Yeah.
exactly, that's the norm. It's a slightly delicate subject for me, obviously, as a coming from an English-speaking country, to be talking about this in a country where English isn't, but I would say that in terms of global business, English is absolutely the language of choice now for most. I mean, if you look at most multinationals, even multinationals based out of Japan or the continent of Europe, they very often operate in English simply because it has become, the lingua franca, if you want to put it that way, of international business. So I think undoubtedly being proficient in English does unlock many more opportunities for young people, not just in Malaysia but elsewhere. And I can see all around the region a real appetite and hunger to learn more and better English. And I think it's going to become a really key part of what you were referring to, which is competitiveness. And to attract international trade and investment, definitely language is one of the factors that people look for. And I think maybe Malaysia had an edge there that perhaps they don't have because other countries are now so focused on it in the region.
Of course, been a pleasure speaking to you. We don't have much time left on the clock, but I still have very many questions. But very quickly, at the beginning of your role as envoy, what ideas did you initially arrive with? And looking back, what do you think you could have done perhaps differently to further strengthen the Malaysia-UK ties?
One thing I wanted to do more on, but have not succeeded, is to encourage more British people to come and study and work in Malaysia. We're very fortunate here. So many Malaysians go and study in the UK. So many Malaysians are very familiar with the UK. It really helps in terms of business and culture and all the things that we're trying to do. But very few young British people come to study and work in Malaysia. And I really wanted to try to reverse that. We're making some inroads now through a scheme called the Touring Scheme, which allows British students to come here. But there's more to do.
And if once you get back and someone says, Charles, tell me about 3 things, or if you could sum Malaysia up in 3 descriptive words, which words would you use?
Wow. Diverse, beautiful, food,
Yeah.
I think has to be the final word.
So diverse, beautiful and food. And as you exit, what advice would you give your successor?
Well, I can give her some advice. I'm talking to her in a minute, actually, after this. So
You have an interview with Jessy if you come.
So one of the things that I regret, and I do blame COVID a bit for this, is that I studied Malay before I came here, and I spent a month living in Johor Bahru with the family, which is a fantastic experience. But of course then COVID came, and my opportunities to speak Malay dwindled. So my advice to her would be get out and about, engage with people, and use your Malay to really understand, back to the point I was making, listening to people, understanding their points of view.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. It's been a pleasure, and it gives me great privilege. Of course, we had interviewed you when you first arrived, and now upon your exit as well. Wishing you all the success in life, and hope to have you back here in Malaysia very soon. That has been our conversation right here on The Nation. Thank you so much for joining us. Keep it locked on to Bernama TV for more updates coming our way. See you next time. Bye-bye.